Vincent Caldwell's hand tightened around Amanda Whitmore's waist with a familiarity that bordered on impropriety. The ballroom of the Roosevelt Hotel in Manhattan buzzed with New York's business elite, but he seemed unfazed by the glances that occasionally turned his way. Amanda, in her red dress that cost more than most people earned in a year, leaned in to whisper something in his ear, and Vincent laughed a little too loudly, sipping his third glass of champagne of the evening. No one there knew that, in a small apartment in Brooklyn, his wife was probably working late again. No one needed to know. During 8 years of marriage, Vincent had carefully constructed a narrative that served him perfectly. Beatrice was too reserved, too introverted, too uncomfortable in sophisticated settings. It was kinder to leave her at home, he'd explain with a sympathetic smile when someone asked about her, which happened less and less often. The truth Vincent guarded like a shameful secret was quite different. Beatrice Chen had grown up in a laundry in Chinatown, the daughter of immigrants who barely spoke English. Her hands had known hard labor even before they knew school books. She had paid for community college by working 3 jobs, and when Vincent met her, she still carried that slight accent that betrayed her origins, that way of dressing that screamed working class. He had fallen in love with her, or so he believed at the time. Beatrice was different from the women who circulated in his corporate environment, genuine where others were calculated, sweet where others were sharp. But that was before Vincent got the promotion at Meridian Capital, before he started frequenting the right circles, before he realized that a wife was also a social statement. Amanda slid her hand down his arm, her fingers playing with the sleeve of his Italian tuxedo. She was everything Beatrice wasn't, born with a silver spoon in her mouth, educated in Swiss schools, connected to the right families. Her father, Richard Whitmore, owned a chain of hotels that stretched across the entire East Coast. Her mother, a former model, who now chaired 3 charity boards. "You're distracted tonight," Amanda murmured, her voice laden with an unspoken promise. "Thinking of me?" Vincent smiled, that practiced smile he used in business meetings. Always. Across the ballroom, Marcus Chen, Beatrice's younger brother, watched the scene with an expression that blended disdain and suppressed anger. He was there for work. His tech consulting firm had sponsored one of the night's award categories. But he couldn't take his eyes off Vincent. He knew exactly what his brother-in-law was doing, and more importantly, he knew exactly what Beatrice was about to do. The annual charity gala for the Business Innovation Foundation was the most important event on New York's social calendar. CEOs, investors, politicians, and celebrities mingled under the crystal chandeliers, all pretending they were there for charity when, in truth, they were there for the connections. Vincent had waited all year for this night, securing an invitation through a colleague whose father was on the board. He had brought Amanda instead of Beatrice, as he always did at these events, and was reveling in the poorly disguised envy of other men. "They say this year's business breakthrough is a surprise," commented Gregory Ashford, another executive from Meridian Capital, approaching with his own wife hanging on his arm. "Someone who came out of nowhere with a tech startup that's revolutionizing the market." Vincent shrugged, little interested. He was more focused on ensuring the right people saw him with Amanda, that they were photographed together, that his presence was noted and remembered. The ballroom lights began to dim, signaling that the awards ceremony was about to begin. Vincent guided Amanda to a table near the stage, pleased with the prime location. He didn't notice Marcus discreetly stepping away, a smile of anticipation playing on his lips. The master of ceremonies, a famous actor who lent his name to the cause, took the stage in his impeccable tuxedo and rehearsed smile. He began with the usual speeches, thanking sponsors, talking about the importance of innovation, telling jokes that elicited polite chuckles from the audience. Vincent barely paid attention. His hand rested dangerously close to Amanda's thigh under the table, and he was calculating if he could convince her to slip away with him to one of the hotel rooms later. He had reserved a suite just in case. Beatrice would never know. Beatrice never knew anything. "And now," the presenter's voice boomed through the sound system, capturing the audience's renewed attention. we arrive at the most anticipated moment of the night. The Entrepreneurial Breakthrough Award of the Year is granted to an entrepreneur who has not only demonstrated extraordinary vision and impeccable execution, but who also embodies the values of innovation and social impact that this foundation celebrates. Vincent took another sip of champagne, half bored. These awards were always for the same types of people, heirs to fortunes who played at entrepreneurship with daddy's money. This year, the presenter continued, his voice taking on a tone of genuine admiration. Our winner is someone who started with absolutely nothing. The daughter of immigrants, she worked tirelessly while studying, and 5 years ago, she founded a tech startup in a small apartment in Brooklyn. Something in Vincent's stomach clenched, an uncomfortable sense of premonition. Her artificial intelligence platform for optimizing sustainable business processes revolutionized the market. In just 3 years, her company, Green Tech Solutions, was valued at $3.5 billion. She is the youngest Asian American woman to achieve billionaire status on her own merit. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Beatrice Chen Caldwell. Vincent's world stopped. The sound around him turned into a distant hum. He watched, completely paralyzed, as his wife, the woman he had hidden for years, ascended the stage to an explosion of deafening applause. Beatrice was stunning. She wore an emerald green dress that hugged her body in a way Vincent had never seen. Her dark hair pulled back into an elegant bun that accentuated her delicate features. But it wasn't just her appearance that had changed. It was the way she moved, the confidence in every step, the serene smile that touched her lips as she waved to the crowd rising in an ovation. Amanda had subtly pulled away, her wide eyes darting between the stage and Vincent. Around the table, people began to whisper, casting curious, then condemning, glances in his direction. Beatrice accepted the award with grace, and when she began to speak, her voice was clear and firm, with no trace of the shyness Vincent had always used as an excuse. "Thank you," she began, and Vincent felt every word like a blade. "This award represents much more than business success for me. It represents victory over every person who told me I wasn't good enough, that my origins would define me, that I should remain invisible." Her eyes swept across the audience, and for a brief moment, met Vincent's. The silence that followed Beatrice's gaze lasted only a fraction of a second, but to Vincent, it felt like an eternity. He felt the weight of every person in the ballroom, as if they were all specifically watching his reaction. Amanda had completely removed her hand from his arm, creating a visible space between them on the velvet chair. "When I first met my husband," Beatrice continued, her voice flowing through the sound system with crystalline clarity, "I believed that love meant accepting invisibility, that my role was to diminish myself so others could shine. It took me a long time to understand that no one has the right to extinguish your light." Vincent felt sweat begin to bead on his forehead. His bow tie suddenly felt too tight, suffocating. Around him, the whispers had escalated into an audible murmur. Gregory Ashford, who moments earlier had been toying with the idea of doing business with him, now watched him with an expression of obvious discomfort. "Green Tech Solutions was born from a personal need," Beatrice continued, holding the crystal trophy with a firmness that violently contrasted with the fragile woman Vincent thought he knew. "I worked 16-hour days at 3 different jobs, and I saw how small businesses struggled to implement sustainable practices due to a lack of resources and technical knowledge. My parents, who owned a laundry in Chinatown, were the perfect example of that struggle." The mention of her parents made Vincent wince internally. How many times had he found excuses not to visit them? How many times had he forgotten to mention his in-laws when talking about family with colleagues? "I started developing algorithms at night after my shifts ended," Beatrice continued, and Vincent noticed tears glistening in the eyes of several people in the audience. "At first, it was just a way to help my parents reduce energy and water costs. But when I realized the potential, when I saw that I could help thousands of small business owners like them, I dedicated every free minute to the project." Vincent felt a lump form in his throat. For the past 5 years, he had assumed Beatrice was at home watching television or cleaning when he left for his networking events. He had never asked about her day, never shown interest in the laptop she always kept open on the small dining table. My brother Marcus was the first person to believe in me. Beatrice gestured to where Marcus stood, and the camera caught him smiling with genuine pride. He introduced me to investors, taught me the language of business, showed me that I had as much right to occupy these spaces as anyone else. Marcus discreetly raised his glass in a silent toast, and Beatrice returned the gesture with a smile that lit up her entire face. Vincent had never seen that smile directed at him, not in recent years at least. Today, Green Tech Solutions serves over 50,000 small and medium-sized businesses across North America, Beatrice announced, and a new wave of applause echoed through the ballroom. We help our clients reduce their carbon footprints by an average of 40%, while saving 30% on operational costs. But the number I'm most proud of is this: 70% of our employees are women, and 50% are people of color or first-generation immigrants. The standing ovation that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. All of New York's business elite stood, applauding a woman who had started with nothing and built an empire. Vincent remained seated, his legs seeming to have lost the ability to function. Amanda slowly rose, joining the applause, but her eyes constantly darted towards Vincent with a mix of confusion and growing revulsion. She had spent the entire night flirting with a married man, a man who had apparently hidden and disparaged a wife who now revealed herself to be one of the most successful entrepreneurs of the generation. "There are people I especially want to thank tonight," Beatrice said as the applause finally subsided. "My parents, who taught me that hard work and integrity are worth more than any last name. My brother, who never allowed me to believe the lies others told about my worth. And my team at Green Tech, who every day bet on the vision of a world where success and sustainability go hand in hand." Vincent noticed the deliberate omission. She hadn't mentioned him, her own husband, and she hadn't uttered his name once. "This award isn't just mine," Beatrice concluded, her voice laden with genuine emotion. "It belongs to everyone who has been underestimated, hidden, or told they weren't good enough. You are, we are, and we deserve to be here." The final ovation was deafening. People Vincent had spent the entire night trying to impress now completely ignored his existence, focused entirely on the woman on stage. Camera flashes erupted throughout the ballroom as journalists captured every angle of Beatrice descending the stage. Before she could make her way back into the ballroom, she was surrounded by a throng of investors and CEOs, all eager to speak with her, to be seen by her side. Vincent watched, powerless, as Richard Whitmore, Amanda's father, practically pushed people aside to reach Beatrice. "Ms. Chen Caldwell." Richard's voice was obsequious in a way Vincent had never heard from him. "Richard Whitmore, Whitmore Hotels. We're looking to implement sustainable solutions across our entire chain, and we'd love to discuss a partnership with Green Tech." Beatrice smiled politely, accepting the business card Richard offered her. "We'd be pleased to schedule a meeting, Mr. Whitmore. Our business development team will be in touch." The interaction was professional, courteous, and utterly devastating for Vincent. The man he had spent months cultivating, hoping to impress, now treated his wife like royalty, while Vincent had become invisible. Amanda lightly touched his shoulder, and when Vincent finally looked at her, he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Disdain. "I didn't know you were married to her," Amanda whispered, but her tone wasn't apologetic. It was accusatory, as if Vincent had purposely misled her. "You told me your wife was. You always spoke of her as if she were some kind of burden." "Amanda, I can explain," Vincent began, but the words died in his throat, because there was no explanation that wouldn't make him appear exactly what he was. A small man who had tried to make himself seem great by diminishing someone else. "Don't worry," Amanda replied, her voice cold. "I think I understand perfectly now." She stood up, smoothing her red dress. It was an enlightening evening. Vincent watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the marble floor as she headed towards where her father was still animatedly talking with Beatrice. She touched Richard's arm, murmured something in his ear, and both cast a brief glance in Vincent's direction before turning their attention back to Beatrice. The table around Vincent was emptying. Gregory and his wife had already disappeared. Other colleagues from Meridian Capital who had been there found excuses to move to other areas of the ballroom. No one wanted to be seen sitting next to the man who had tried to hide a rising star. Vincent finally forced his legs to function and stood up, but he didn't know where to go. The ballroom that had seemed so welcoming moments before now felt like a hostile labyrinth. Every group of people seemed to be talking about Beatrice, about her inspiring story, about how incredible it was that she had achieved so much. He began to walk aimlessly, passing fragmented conversations that hit his ears like arrows. 3.5 billion in just 5 years. And apparently she did it all while married. Imagine having that kind of focus. Know her husband? I heard he never supported her. A shame, really, trying to hide someone like that. Vincent found temporary refuge near the bar, ordering a double whiskey that the bartender served with a neutral expression. He downed the liquid in one gulp, feeling the burn descend his throat, wishing he could erase the last few hours. Vincent Caldwell, a familiar voice said behind him. Marcus Chen approached, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp as blades. Or should I say Vincent Caldwell, husband of Beatrice Chen Caldwell, the billionaire. Vincent turned to face his brother-in-law, the man he had treated with condescension at every family gathering, assuming Marcus was exaggerating about the success of his consulting firm. Marcus, Vincent managed to say, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. You know what's funny? Marcus didn't wait for a response. Beatrice made me promise not to tell you about Green Tech. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do it alone, without support, without recognition. She wanted to be sure it was real before sharing. Marcus's statement hung in the air between them like toxic smoke. Vincent gripped the empty glass so hard his knuckles turned white, the reality of his brother-in-law's words slowly penetrating through the fog of shock that enveloped his mind. She wanted it to be real, Vincent repeated, his voice almost inaudible amidst the ballroom's murmur. And You hid her, Marcus finished, no emotion in his voice, merely stating a fact. All these years, while she was working until 3 a.m. developing algorithms, you were here at these events, with women like that. He gestured vaguely in the direction where Amanda had disappeared into the crowd. Vincent swallowed hard, unable to formulate a defense that wouldn't sound pathetic. His carefully constructed justifications, the narratives he had repeated to himself about protecting Beatrice, about sparing her the discomfort of social events, crumbled like sandcastles before the tide. I didn't know, was all Vincent could manage, and even to his own ears it sounded like the emptiest excuse in the world. You didn't know because you never asked, Marcus retorted, his calm composure somehow more devastating than open anger would have been. Do you know how many times Beatrice mentioned her work during family dinner? How many times she tried to share her achievements with you? I was there, Vincent. I saw you change the subject, pick up your phone, find any excuse not to listen. Memories Vincent had conveniently forgotten began to surface, each a small betrayal that now seemed monumentally cruel. Beatrice trying to show him something on her laptop, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, and him distractedly replying that he was busy, her mentioning an important meeting, and him assuming it was something related to one of the low-level jobs he'd assumed she still held. My parents tried to talk to you about her work, Marcus continued, relentless. They were so proud when she told them about her first clients, about the first round of investments. And you left the room to take a call that could have waited. Vincent remembered that day. It had been 3 years ago during Chinese New Year. The small Chen laundry was closed for celebration, and the family had gathered in the modest apartment above the establishment. He had felt suffocated by the cramped space, by the persistent smell of detergent and steam, by the conversations in Cantonese he didn't understand. When his phone rang, he had practically run out. She closed a $2 million deal that week, Marcus said, and Vincent felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. It was the validation she needed to pursue the second round of investments. But you were too busy to notice. Across the ballroom, Beatrice was surrounded by a growing throng of admirers. Her laughter occasionally floated through the background music, a sound Vincent realized he hadn't heard in years. When was the last time he had made his wife laugh? When was the last time he had even tried? "You know what's worse?" Marcus asked, following Vincent's gaze. She still had hope. Even after everything, she thought that maybe when Green Tech got big enough, when she proved her worth in a way that even you couldn't ignore, maybe then you would finally truly see her. "Marcus, please," Vincent began, but he had no idea how to finish the sentence. What could he ask for? Forgiveness? Understanding? He deserved neither. "She bought this dress 3 months ago," Marcus said, his voice finally showing a crack of emotion. "When she found out she had been chosen for the award. She spent weeks preparing, practicing her speech. Do you know what she told me? That this time, when she walked onto the stage to receive recognition for what she had built, her husband would finally be in the audience watching, proud." The guilt Vincent felt was physical, a pressure in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He looked at Beatrice again, truly looked, and saw not only the successful woman who had stunned Manhattan tonight, but all the versions of her he had ignored over the years, the dedicated student who worked 3 jobs, the talented programmer who saw problems as puzzles waiting to be solved, the daughter who loved her parents enough to build a company that honored them. "She filed for divorce 2 weeks ago," Marcus said, and this time his voice was completely devoid of emotion. "The papers are with her lawyer. She was just waiting until after tonight to serve you." The floor beneath Vincent's feet seemed to tilt. Divorce. The word echoed in his mind, carrying with it the inevitable reality of everything he had lost before he even realized he possessed it. 2 weeks, Vincent murmured. "She's been home these last 2 weeks, and You spent 4 nights in your work apartment in the city," Marcus finished with disdain. "The one you think Beatrice doesn't know about. She knows, Vincent. She always knew." Vincent felt nausea rise in his throat. The apartment he kept in Tribeca, the one he used for his trysts with Amanda, and before her, other women whose names and faces were beginning to blur in his memory. He had been so careful, or so he thought, covering his tracks, using separate credit cards. But of course, Beatrice knew. She had built a billion-dollar company in artificial intelligence. What chance did he have of hiding anything from someone with that level of analytical capability? "I need to talk to her," Vincent said, taking a step in the direction where Beatrice stood, but Marcus blocked his path with a subtle movement. "Not tonight," Marcus said firmly. "Tonight is hers. For the first time in 8 years, she has a night that is completely, undeniably hers. You won't take that away from her too." Vincent stopped, powerless, watching as Beatrice was escorted to another area of the ballroom by a group of journalists. Camera flashes followed her like a halo of light, capturing every angle of her triumph. She posed for photos alongside other award-winning entrepreneurs, her smile never wavering, her presence commanding every space she occupied. A Forbes reporter approached her with a microphone, and Vincent watched Beatrice nod politely before she began to speak. Even at that distance, he could see the confidence in her posture, the articulation in her gestures. This was not the timid woman he had described to colleagues. This had never been her. He had created a convenient fiction and lived in it for so long that he had forgotten reality. "You know what's saddest about all this?" Marcus said, his earlier anger giving way to something that seemed dangerously close to pity. "She really loved you. When you got married, she believed she had found someone who would see her beyond her origins, someone who would love all parts of her. And for a while, maybe you did love her. But somewhere along the way, you decided that your social ambition was more important than the woman you married." Vincent wanted to argue, to defend himself, but Marcus's words were too true to dispute. He could trace his own transformation, how each promotion at Meridian Capital had come with new expectations, new circles to penetrate, new standards to meet. And at some point, Beatrice had started to seem like an obstacle instead of a partner. "I can change," Vincent said, hating the desperation in his own voice. "I can be better. I can support her now. I can." "Support her now?" Marcus scoffed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Now that she's a billionaire, now that all of New York knows her name, don't you see how that sounds?" Vincent saw. God, he saw with crystalline clarity. Any attempt at reconciliation now would look exactly like what it was, a man desperately clinging to a source of status he had scorned until it became impossible to ignore. In the VIP area of the ballroom, Richard Whitmore had managed to monopolize Beatrice's attention, gesticulating animatedly as he discussed partnership terms. Amanda stood beside her father, but her gaze occasionally drifted to where Vincent stood, and there was something in her expression, a mixture of morbid curiosity and disdain, that made Vincent want to disappear completely. "She'll be better off without you," Marcus said, and though the words were cruel, his tone was almost gentle. Beatrice was always strong enough to shine. You only managed to slow her down, not stop her. And now that she's free, now that she doesn't have to worry about being small enough to fit into the box you built for her, there are no limits to what she can achieve. Vincent watched, paralyzed, as his wife, the woman he had underestimated and hidden for years, moved through the ballroom as if she had been born for it. And perhaps she had. Perhaps this had always been her natural trajectory, and he had simply been an obstacle in her path, something for her to overcome, rather than grow alongside. The band began to play again, a soft waltz inviting couples to the dance floor. Vincent watched as a silver-haired CEO, whose company was listed in the Fortune 500, approached Beatrice, offering his hand with a respectful smile. She accepted gracefully, and they moved together across the dance floor with an ease that made Vincent's heart clench painfully. He had never danced with her, not once in 8 years of marriage. The music ceased, and Beatrice thanked the CEO with an elegant nod before immediately being approached by another group of investors. Vincent watched her from afar, his empty whiskey glass still clutched in his hand like an unnecessary anchor. Every passing second widened the chasm between them, transforming what had once been an emotional distance into an insurmountable canyon. Marcus was still by his side, a silent guardian ensuring Vincent maintained his distance. But now his brother-in-law no longer needed to say anything. Vincent could feel the truth solidifying in his bones like cold concrete. He had lost something precious long before he realized it was slipping through his fingers. A waiter passed, offering elaborate canapés, and Vincent mechanically refused. His stomach was too churned to eat. Around the ballroom, conversations flowed like rivers converging into a delta, and all eventually reached the same ocean. Beatrice Chen Caldwell and her meteoric rise. "I heard Microsoft has been trying to acquire green tech for months," a woman in a cobalt blue dress commented to her companion near the bar. "But she turned down a $6 billion offer." $6 billion. Said her mission was more important than the money. Vincent felt something twist inside his chest. $6 billion. His wife had refused $6 billion while he boasted about his promotion to junior vice president at Meridian Capital, a title that came with a $60,000 annual raise. The irony was so bitter, it almost made him laugh. "She's revolutionizing an entire industry," the woman's companion replied with genuine admiration. "And she still retains 60% of the company's shares. Complete control. That's practically unheard of for a startup that's grown so fast." Vincent had never understood anything about business, he realized now. Not really. He knew corporate politics, knew how to navigate hierarchies and impress the right people. But building something from scratch, creating real value where there was nothing before, transforming an idea into a life-changing empire, That required a kind of vision and courage he had never possessed. Beatrice was now near one of the immense windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city stretching out below her in a tapestry of lights. A Vogue photographer positioned his camera, capturing her silhouette against the urban skyline. She seemed to belong to that view, as if she had always been destined to be above it all, looking at the world from a perspective few ever achieved. Vincent remembered when he first met her 9 years ago, at a coffee shop near the community college where she studied. He was there meeting a client, and she was working as a barista during her afternoon shift. Her hands had trembled slightly when she served his coffee, nervous under his gaze. He had found it charming at the time, that fragility that made him feel strong and protective. Now he understood that it had never been fragility. It was merely youth, the natural hesitation of someone still learning to occupy her space in the world. And instead of helping her grow into that confidence, he had systematically worked to keep her small, because a confident and assertive Beatrice would have seen right through him much sooner. "You should leave," Marcus said softly, breaking the long silence between them. There was no more anger in his voice, just a kind of resigned weariness. "Staying here will only make things harder for her." Vincent wanted to argue, wanted to say that he had a right to be there, that she was still his wife. But the words sounded hollow even in his own mind. What right did he truly have? He had failed every promise he made at the altar. Fidelity, partnership, support through good times and bad. He had broken it all, not in one fell swoop, but in 1,000 small daily betrayals. "The divorce papers," Vincent heard himself say. "When?" "Monday morning," Marcus replied. "A messenger will deliver them to your office. She's being more than generous with the terms, by the way. She's not asking for anything beyond what you brought into the marriage. No alimony, no division of her assets. She just wants her freedom." Freedom. The word echoed strangely in Vincent's ears. Beatrice was buying her freedom from a marriage that should have been her foundation, not her prison. And what had he done all those years but build the walls of that cell, brick by brick, with every lie and every moment of shame he had felt toward her? Across the ballroom, Amanda reappeared in his field of vision. She was now chatting animatedly with a group of young tech entrepreneurs, her red dress a vibrant splash amidst the black tuxedos. When her eyes met Vincent's for a brief moment, there was no warmth there, no trace of the intimacy they had shared just hours before. There was only indifference, as if he had already become irrelevant in her narrative. Vincent realized with a sudden shock that Amanda had never cared about him. Not truly. She had cared about the idea of him, about what a relationship with him represented in terms of rebellion against her parents' expectations, of forbidden excitement. But the person he was, his thoughts, his fears, his dreams, she knew nothing of those, and had never shown any interest in knowing. Beatrice, on the other hand, had known all those parts of him. In the early years of their marriage, she used to ask questions, genuinely curious about his day, his aspirations, what made him happy or sad. When had he stopped answering honestly? When had their conversations deteriorated into superficial exchanges about bills and appointments? A musical laugh floated across the ballroom, and Vincent turned instinctively toward the sound. Beatrice was smiling at something one of the investors had said, her head slightly tilted, her eyes sparkling with genuine amusement. She looked so alive, so present in a way he hadn't seen her be in years. Perhaps never, at least not when she was with him. "She's going to be happy," Vincent said in a low voice, more to himself than to Marcus. "Without me, she's going to be happy." "Yes," Marcus agreed without hesitation. "She will." The simplicity of the answer was more devastating than any accusation could have been. There was no doubt there, no need for elaboration. It was just a fact, as certain as gravity or the passage of time. Beatrice would be better, happier, more complete without him in her life. Vincent placed the empty glass on the bar counter and straightened his bow tie by reflex. a purposeless gesture he had made 1,000 times at events like this. Events where he had obsessively worried about his appearance, about who he knew, about who saw him. How much time had he wasted cultivating an image that now revealed itself to be built on foundations of sand? "There's a side exit," Marcus said, gesturing discreetly to an almost invisible door near the coat check. "You can avoid the main crowd. The valets know the way." It was a kindness Vincent didn't deserve, and they both knew it. But Marcus had always been a better man than Vincent, even when Vincent had looked down on him, assuming Marcus's consulting business was just a modest venture. To discover now that Marcus was on GreenTech's advisory board, that he had been instrumental in every major decision that led to Beatrice's success, was just another layer of humiliation. Vincent took a step toward the exit, then stopped. His eyes met Beatrice's one last time across the crowd. She was now being introduced to someone Vincent vaguely recognized as a state senator, her posture erect, her handshake firm, every inch of her conveying competence and grace. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the room. Vincent expected to see anger there, or perhaps pain, some vestige of the woman who had loved him enough to marry him despite all odds against them. But what he saw was something far worse. Nothing. Her eyes passed over him as they would a stranger, with no significant recognition, no emotion. He had already become a closed chapter in her story, something she had moved past and left behind. Beatrice turned her attention back to the senator, smiling politely as he spoke, completely present in that moment, while Vincent remained trapped in a past he couldn't undo. He turned and walked toward the side exit, his footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. Marcus didn't follow. There was no need. Vincent knew the way to his own irrelevance. The corridor leading to the side exit was silent, acoustically isolated from the main ballroom. The sounds of celebration, laughter, and music were left behind, muffled by heavy doors and thick walls. Vincent could hear only his own breathing and the sound of his shoes against the polished floor. There were mirrors along the corridor, infinite reflections of himself stretching in both directions. Vincent stopped before one of them, forcing himself to truly look. His tuxedo was still impeccable, his hair perfectly combed, his outward appearance exactly as he had planned when he dressed hours earlier. But something in his eyes had changed. He saw now what perhaps others had seen for years. A man who had mistaken surface for substance, who had believed that appearing successful was the same as achieving it. From the inner pocket of his jacket, his phone vibrated. A text message from Amanda. "It was a bad idea. Don't contact me again." Short, to the point, discarding him with the ease of someone deleting an unwanted email. Vincent should have felt something, anger or sadness, but there was only a numbing emptiness. Amanda didn't matter, he realized. She never had. She was just another reflection of his own insecurities, another attempt to prove something he had never managed to articulate, not even to himself. He kept walking, pushing the heavy door that led to a service corridor. The walls here were plain, painted institutional white, without any of the golden ornaments and crystal chandeliers of the main ballroom. This was the backstage area, where the magic happened far from the eyes of the glamorous guests. A hotel employee passed by, pushing a cart of dirty dishes, nodding politely at Vincent without truly seeing him. To that man, Vincent was just another customer in a tuxedo, indistinguishable from hundreds of others. There was no recognition of status, no special deference, just a courteous gesture before moving on. Vincent finally emerged onto a side exit that led to a less busy street behind the hotel. The New York night enveloped him with its familiar chaos, distant sirens, muffled voices, the constant hum of the city that never slept. The air was colder than he expected, and he realized he had left his overcoat hanging in the ballroom's coat check. One more thing he would eventually have to retrieve. One more physical reminder of this night he would never be able to forget. A taxi passed by, its bright yellow lights cutting through the darkness. Vincent raised his hand automatically, and the driver pulled over to the curb. As he slid into the back seat, giving the driver the address of his Tribeca apartment, Vincent looked back one last time at the Roosevelt Hotel. Golden light spilled from the ballroom windows on the 10th floor, and even from that distance, he could imagine Beatrice inside, shining like the star she had always been, finally free to show the world all she was capable of being. The taxi cut through the streets of Manhattan, its headlights briefly illuminating late-night pedestrians and closed storefronts before plunging back into the darkness between buildings. Vincent was hunched in the back seat, watching the city pass by the window without truly seeing it. The driver, a middle-aged man with an accent Vincent couldn't identify, tried to initiate a conversation about the traffic, but quickly gave up in the face of the monosyllabic replies he received. The Tribeca apartment was silent when Vincent entered, his reflection in the entryway mirror showing a man who looked as though he had aged 10 years in a single night. He tossed his keys onto the side table, the clink of metal against porcelain echoing too loudly in the empty space. This place, with its minimalist furniture and sterile white walls, had never truly been a home. It was a set piece, like everything else in his life, carefully arranged to impress without revealing anything true. His phone continued to vibrate insistently in his pocket, but Vincent didn't have the energy to check it. They were probably messages from colleagues at Meridian Capital, some perhaps feigning ignorance of his connection to Beatrice, others more direct in their morbid curiosity. It didn't matter. Nothing they said would change the fundamental reality that had solidified in his mind during the taxi ride. He had destroyed the only real thing he had ever had. Vincent walked to the panoramic window overlooking the Hudson, the river snaking dark beneath the city lights. How many nights had he spent here with Amanda and others before her, drinking expensive wine and making plans that never included Beatrice? How many times had he congratulated himself on keeping the parts of his life carefully compartmentalized, never questioning the cruelty of that separation? His hand found his phone in his pocket, and before he could think better of it, Vincent was scrolling through his photo gallery. There were hundreds of images from the past few years, snapshots of corporate events, elaborate dinners, trips he meticulously documented for his social media. But as he scrolled further and further back in time, searching for some trace of Beatrice, he found very little. A blurred photo from 3 years ago, taken by mistake in what looked like their Brooklyn apartment kitchen. Another from their wedding, Beatrice smiling shyly in her simple dress, while Vincent posed confidently beside her. He enlarged the wedding photo, studying his wife's face on that distant day. There was hope there, in her eyes, a conviction that they were starting something meaningful together. When had that hope turned into resignation? When had she stopped waiting for him to truly see her? Vincent closed the photo app and opened his email, knowing he was procrastinating the inevitable. There were dozens of unread messages, but one subject line stood out. Status update. Beatrice Chen Caldwell. It was an automatic Google alert he had set up years ago when he still maintained the illusion of interest in his wife's life. He clicked, and the screen filled with headlines and articles published only in the last few hours. GreenTech Solutions and its visionary founder take Manhattan by storm. From Chinatown laundry to billion-dollar empire, the inspiring story of Beatrice Chen Caldwell. The billionaire you never heard of is changing the future of corporate sustainability. Vincent read each article, torturing himself with details of Beatrice's journey that he should have known as a husband, but was discovering as a stranger through the media. A Bloomberg profile described how she had developed GreenTech's first algorithms on a used laptop she bought from a thrift store, working between shifts at the coffee shop where she met Vincent. Forbes detailed her business philosophy, extensively quoting her belief that true success meant lifting others up, not stepping on them to climb higher. A video embedded in one of the articles showed part of her speech from the night. Vincent pressed play, Beatrice's face filling his phone screen. She was radiant under the stage lights, her voice clear and firm as she spoke about overcoming limited expectations and finding strength in her roots. People often ask me how I managed to build GreenTech while maintaining my identity and values. she said in the recording. The truth is, I couldn't have done it any other way. Everything I am, everything I've built, comes directly from the lessons I learned from my parents in that small Chinatown laundry. They taught me that hard work has dignity, that every person deserves respect regardless of their position, and that success without integrity isn't real success. Vincent closed the video, unable to continue watching. Every word was an indirect accusation, a reminder of everything he had failed to be. He threw his phone onto the sofa and walked to the built-in bar, pouring himself whiskey without bothering to add ice or measure the amount. The liquid burned his throat, but it didn't bring the numbness he sought. The Brooklyn apartment. Vincent realized he hadn't been there in almost a month, using work and convenience as excuses to stay in Tribeca. That place, with its modest 2 bedrooms and view of a busy street, had been their first home as a couple. Beatrice still lived there, he knew, even though she could now afford any property in Manhattan. Why had she stayed? The answer came with painful clarity. Because she had never been ashamed of her origins as he had been. The Brooklyn apartment represented where she came from, and Beatrice had never seen that as something to hide. Vincent looked around the Tribeca apartment, truly looked for the first time. Everything there was expensive but impersonal, chosen by a decorator he had hired to create what he called modern urban sophistication. There were no framed photos, no objects that told a story, nothing that revealed who truly lived there. It was a showroom, not a home. His phone lit up again on the sofa, and this time Vincent went to check. It was a text message from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Caldwell, this is Jennifer Wu, Mrs. Chen Caldwell's assistant. She asked me to confirm your address for document delivery on Monday. Please reply confirming if Meridian Capital, 450 Park Avenue, is correct. The formality of the message, the use of Beatrice's full surname without including his, the clinical reference to documents instead of divorce papers, all of it was deliberate. Beatrice was setting boundaries, creating professional distance where once there had been marital intimacy, or at least where there should have been. Vincent typed a simple confirmation, and then, before he could think better of it, added, "Please tell her I would like to talk before signing anything." The reply came almost immediately. Noted. She will contact you if she is willing. If she is willing. Not when, but if. Vincent was now an optional appointment on his wife's agenda, something she might choose to fit in if she felt he was worth her time. He sank onto the sofa, exhaustion finally penetrating the armor of shock he had maintained for the past few hours. His eyes scanned the ceiling, tracing patterns in the shadows cast by the streetlights. How much time had he wasted in this place, in this life he had built on foundations of shame and misdirected ambition? A memory surfaced, unbidden but insistent. It had been perhaps a year after their wedding, and they still lived in the small studio apartment they had initially rented. Beatrice was in the tiny kitchen, trying to prepare an elaborate dinner despite the limited space. She had burned the sauce and cut her finger while chopping vegetables, and when Vincent walked in after work, she was crying, frustrated with her own limitations. He had held her that night, helped clean up the mess, ordered Thai takeout. They had eaten sitting on the floor because they still didn't have a proper dining table, and Beatrice had laughed through her tears, saying something about how someday she would be good at everything. Vincent had kissed her forehead and replied that she already was good at everything that mattered. When had he stopped believing that? When had her humble origins transformed from something he admired into something that shamed him? The truth was uncomfortable. It had never been about Beatrice changing. It was he who had changed, or perhaps merely revealed who he always was beneath the surface. Each promotion at Meridian Capital had come with exposure to a more privileged world, and Vincent had absorbed that world's prejudices as if they were wisdom, instead of recognizing them for the elitism they were. He had started to notice how colleagues spoke about their wives, always emphasizing pedigrees and family connections. He had begun to feel uncomfortable when someone asked what Beatrice did. "Because she works in various places," sounded much less impressive than "she runs the family's charitable foundation" or "she's a curator at MoMA." Vincent picked up his phone again, this time opening LinkedIn. Beatrice's profile had exploded with followers in the last few hours, the numbers visibly increasing even as he watched. Her professional photo showed the same confident woman who had taken the stage at the Roosevelt, and her description was concise but powerful. CEO and founder of Green Tech Solutions, making sustainability accessible for all businesses, regardless of size. There were hundreds of new congratulatory messages, connection requests from high-level CEOs and investors. Vincent scrolled through them, recognizing names he had spent years trying to impress, people who now sought his wife's attention. A notification popped up at the top of the screen, a new post from Beatrice published minutes ago. It was a photo of her with her parents, clearly taken after the event. Her father, Mr. Chen, was in his simple suit that he probably only wore for special occasions, and her mother wore a traditional Chinese dress. Both looked at Beatrice with pride so pure and unadulterated that it made Vincent's heart ache. The caption was simple: "No award will mean more than making my parents proud. Everything I've achieved starts with the sacrifices you made. Wo ai ni men." Vincent didn't need to speak Mandarin to understand the last words. "I love you." When was the last time he had said those words to Beatrice? When was the last time he had truly felt them, without the corrosion of resentment and disappointment he had allowed to fester? Vincent put his phone aside and stood up, walking to the closet. Buried deep inside, behind rows of expensive tuxedos and Italian suits, was a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was the tie he had worn at their wedding. It was nothing special, just a navy blue tie he had bought on sale. But Beatrice had said the color brought out his eyes. Beneath the tie was an envelope, and Vincent opened it with hands that trembled slightly. Inside was a simple card, the kind that came with supermarket flowers. Beatrice's handwriting filled the page, the ink slightly faded, but still legible. "Vincent," it read, "today was the happiest day of my life, not because of the ceremony or the dress, but because I chose to spend my life with someone who truly sees me. Thank you for loving me exactly as I am. I promise to make you proud every day. All my love, forever, Beatrice." Vincent didn't realize he was crying until a tear fell onto the paper, slightly blurring a word. She had kept her promise, he realized. Beatrice had become someone to be proud of, had achieved extraordinary things. But he had never been there to witness, much less celebrate. And now, when the whole world recognized her worth, it was too late for him to claim any part of her journey. He folded the card carefully and returned it to the envelope, tucking it into the inner pocket of his jacket. Monday would come quickly, and with it, the formal delivery of the end of his marriage. Vincent didn't know what he would say to Beatrice if she agreed to see him, what excuses he could offer that wouldn't sound hollow given the magnitude of his failures. But he knew one thing. He wouldn't sign those papers without trying, at least once, to speak the truth he had avoided for years. Not the convenient truth that protected his ego, but the real, ugly truth about his shame, his fear, his deep inadequacy that he had projected onto her. Beatrice deserved at least that, even if it changed absolutely nothing. The weekend passed in a haze of insomnia and regret. Vincent spent the hours wandering between the Tribeca apartment and the streets of Manhattan, unable to find peace anywhere. Every reflective surface became an accusing mirror, every couple passing by hand in hand a reminder of what he had destroyed. On Sunday morning, he finally gave in to the impulse he had been repressing since Friday and took the subway to Brooklyn. The apartment he still shared with Beatrice was in a red brick building in Park Slope, its facade weathered by time but carefully maintained. Vincent stood on the sidewalk across the street for almost 20 minutes, watching the third-floor windows where soft light filtered through the curtains Beatrice had hand-stitched years ago. How many nights had she spent there alone while he invented excuses to stay in Manhattan? He finally crossed the street, his fingers trembling as he searched for the key he rarely used. The lock resisted for a moment, stiff from months of neglect, before yielding with a click that seemed too loud in the silent hallway. Vincent pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find the apartment empty, transformed into a corporate office or stripped of any trace of personal life. What he found left him utterly still on the doorstep. The apartment was exactly as he remembered it, perhaps even more welcoming. The small living room still had the faded second-hand sofa they had bought, but it was now covered with colorful throws that Vincent didn't recognize. The walls, once bare, were decorated with framed photographs, most showing Beatrice with her family, with Marcus, with people Vincent didn't know but who clearly meant something to her. There were also images of her at business events, shaking hands with investors, smiling alongside her team, a visual timeline of an entire life that Vincent had missed by choice. He approached one particular photo, Beatrice cutting the ribbon at the inauguration of what appeared to be Green Tech's first office. She was radiant, surrounded by half a dozen young employees, all sporting T-shirts with the company logo. The date on the plaque behind them read 3 years ago. Vincent vaguely remembered that day, Beatrice mentioning something about an important meeting, and he distractedly replying that he would be working late. He had gone to dinner with Amanda that night, one of the first times they had crossed the line from casual flirting to something more deliberate. The dining table was covered with her laptop and several folders, a half-empty coffee cup resting on a cork coaster. Vincent touched the cup lightly, finding it cold. Beatrice wasn't home, but she had been recently. The apartment carried her subtle scent, that jasmine fragrance she had worn since he met her. He walked to the bedroom, each step heavy with memories that now seemed to belong to another life. The bed was made with military precision, pillows arranged against the wooden headboard they had assembled together on a rainy afternoon years ago. Vincent had complained about the confusing instructions, and Beatrice had laughed at his temper while organizing screws and hinges with methodical efficiency. The closet revealed another painful truth. Vincent's side was practically empty. Just a few old shirts and a pair of shoes he hadn't worn in years. Beatrice's side, on the other hand, was organized but full. There were elegant dresses he had never seen her wear, professional suits in neutral tones, high heels lined up like soldiers in formation. She had built an entire executive wardrobe piece by piece, preparing for the world she would occupy while he assumed she still wore the simple clothes of their early struggles. On the dresser, Vincent found a jewelry box he didn't recognize. Inside there were sophisticated pieces, pearl earrings, a discreet diamond necklace, a Cartier watch. Gifts from investors perhaps, or rewards she had bought for herself with her own hard-earned money. There was nothing there that came from him. Vincent had barely given her gifts in recent years, always finding excuses about budget or time. He was about to close the drawer when he noticed a small blue velvet box hidden at the bottom, beneath silk scarves. His heart quickened as he reached for it, immediately recognizing the case. It was the box that contained Beatrice's wedding ring, that simple white gold band he had bought with 3 months' salary when he was still a junior analyst. Vincent opened the box with trembling fingers, but it was empty. His gaze fell instinctively to his own left hand, where his wedding band still rested, a weight he had long since stopped noticing. Did Beatrice still wear hers? He had been so distracted on Friday that he hadn't paid attention. But now the question consumed him. A sudden sound made him freeze, the front door lock turning. Vincent stood paralyzed in the bedroom, his heart hammering against his ribs as light footsteps crossed the living room. He knew he should reveal himself, announce his presence, but the words caught in his throat. Beatrice appeared at the bedroom door, stopping abruptly when she saw him. She was dressed casually, dark jeans and a white linen blouse, her hair tied in a simple ponytail. There was a shopping bag in her hand, likely from the nearby farmers' market she used to frequent on Sundays. For a long, tense moment, they simply stared at each other across the space that felt simultaneously tiny and impassable. Vincent expected anger, accusations, perhaps even tears. What he saw on her face was something far worse, and much more complex. Deep weariness, resignation, and a kind of quiet sadness that suggested she had already done all her grieving in private. "I should have changed the locks," Beatrice said finally, her voice neutral but not hostile. "But honestly, I didn't think you'd care enough to come back." The words were like a physical slap. Vincent opened his mouth, then closed it again, completely unprepared for this moment, despite having mentally rehearsed for 2 days. "I needed to see," he managed to say. "Needed to understand." Understand what? Beatrice set her bag on the floor near the door, her movements deliberate and calm. "How I built a company while you pretended I didn't exist, or how I finally grew tired of being invisible in my own marriage." The lack of elevated emotion in her voice was somehow more devastating than yelling would have been. She had clearly processed all of this already, worked through the pain, and emerged on the other side with a clarity Vincent was still struggling to achieve. "I saw the pictures." Vincent gestured vaguely towards the living room. "Your whole life here, everything you've built. I didn't know, Beatrice. Not really." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," she replied, crossing her arms lightly. It wasn't a defensive posture, more a gesture of containment, as if holding herself together physically and emotionally. "I tried to tell you, Vincent, so many times in the early years, but you always had something more important to do, someone more important to impress." Vincent forced himself to maintain eye contact, though every instinct screamed for him to look away from the calm accusation in her eyes. "You're right. About everything. I was a coward. And worse, I was cruel in ways I didn't even realize at the time." "You realized?" Beatrice corrected him softly. "Perhaps not at first, but eventually you knew exactly what you were doing. Every time you made an excuse to leave me at home. Every time you changed the subject when I mentioned my work. Every time you looked at me as if I were a problem to be managed instead of a partner to be celebrated, you knew." The truth of that statement settled on Vincent like a tombstone. She was right. At some point along the way, his neglect had ceased to be accidental and had become deliberate, an active choice to keep Beatrice small so he could feel bigger. "The divorce papers," he said, the words coming out rough. "I know they're coming tomorrow. I just wanted, before I sign, I needed you to know that I see it now. I see everything I lost. Everything I destroyed." Beatrice walked to the window, looking out at the street where children played under the supervision of watchful parents. Her posture was relaxed, but Vincent could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers lightly gripped the windowsill. "Seeing isn't enough, Vincent," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of years of accumulated disappointment. "I needed you to see 3 years ago. 5 years ago, when there was still something to save. Now it's just too late." "It can't be too late," Vincent said, hating the desperation in his own voice. "We're still married. There's still a chance." Beatrice turned to face him, and for the first time since she had entered the apartment, her emotions slightly cracked the surface. There was pain there, old and deep, but also something that felt dangerously close to pity. "There is no we anymore, Vincent. Perhaps there never was, not in the way it should exist in a marriage. You married an idea of who I was, someone who made you feel generous and open for loving beyond your social class. But when reality didn't match that fantasy, when my origins became inconvenient for your ambitions, you simply erased me." Every word was precise, surgical in its honesty. Vincent had no defense because no defense was possible. "I can change," he tried, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I don't want you to change for me," Beatrice replied, her voice growing firmer. "If you change, let it be for yourself, because you've realized the man you've become isn't who you want to be. But that journey can no longer include me. I spent too many years trying to be small enough to fit into the life you wanted. Now I've finally discovered how much space I truly occupy, and I won't diminish myself again for anyone." The finality in her words was undeniable. Vincent realized, with a clarity that left him dizzy, that there were no words he could say, no promises he could make that would change Beatrice's decision. She wasn't acting out of anger or revenge. She was simply choosing herself, perhaps for the first time in her life. "The divorce terms are fair," Beatrice continued, her voice returning to that professional tone she had used on stage. "You keep everything you brought into the marriage, and I keep what I've built. No complications, no legal battles. We can end this with dignity, if you allow it." Vincent nodded slowly, feeling the full weight of his choices finally settle completely on his shoulders. "I'll sign the papers," he said in a low voice. "You deserve your freedom. You always deserved more than I gave." Something flickered across Beatrice's face, an emotion so fleeting that Vincent almost missed it. Perhaps relief, perhaps sadness for the final death of something that had once promised to be beautiful. She walked to the bedroom door, a clear indication that the conversation had ended. "I need you to return your key," she said gently but firmly. "This is my space now, and I need it to remain that way." Vincent removed the key from his keychain with fingers that felt numb, extending it to Beatrice. As their fingers briefly touched during the transfer, he felt the absence of his wedding ring. The key dropped into Beatrice's palm with a weight that seemed disproportionate to its physical size. She closed her fist around it for a moment before placing it carefully on the dresser next to the jewelry box Vincent had been examining. The silence between them stretched like glass about to shatter, filled with all the unspoken things that had accumulated over years of mutual neglect. Vincent took a step towards the door, then stopped, turning to face her one last time. Beatrice remained where she was, her posture erect but not rigid, her eyes clear and dry. She had shed all her tears in private, during those lonely nights when she had finally admitted to herself that her marriage had died long before any papers were signed. "Is there something?" Vincent began, his voice coming out hoarse. "Something I can do? Not to save this. I understand we're over. But to, I don't know, show that I recognize how much I messed up?" Beatrice considered the question for a long moment, her eyes sweeping over the man she had once loved with all the naive faith of someone who believed love could overcome any obstacle. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished not physically, but in essence, as if the night at the Roosevelt had stripped away layers of pretense he had worn as armor. "Live better," she said finally, the words simple but laden with meaning. "Be the kind of person who doesn't need to diminish others to feel big. Find value in real things, not in appearances and the approval of strangers. And when you meet someone new, because eventually you will, see her for who she truly is. All parts of her, not just the ones that fit the image you want to project." Vincent absorbed every word as if he were memorizing instructions for a test on which his life depended. Perhaps it was. Perhaps this was his chance to finally learn something true about himself, about what it meant to love someone beyond his own reflection. "Your parents," he said suddenly, the memory surfacing with unexpected force. "They were always kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. I never thanked them properly." Beatrice allowed herself a small smile, the first since she had entered the apartment. "My mother always said you were lost. She has a way of seeing through people. She said that one day you'd wake up and realize what you had, but that it would probably be too late. I used to get annoyed with her for saying that, as if she were giving up on us. But she was just being realistic." The wisdom of that woman Vincent had dismissed so many times, whose heavy accent and simple clothes he had found embarrassing, now struck him with its full depth. Mrs. Chen had seen through him from the start, recognized his fundamental flaws when he still disguised them as confidence and ambition. "When everything is finalized," Vincent said, gesturing vaguely to indicate the divorce process, "I'd like to visit them, your parents, not to cause trouble or create false hope, but to properly apologize. They deserve that." Beatrice studied his face for a moment. looking for signs of manipulation or hidden motives. Finding only sincere weariness and something that might be the beginning of genuine self-awareness, she nodded slowly. "I'll ask if they're willing. But Vincent, if they say no, you need to respect that. They don't owe you forgiveness, just as I don't." "I understand," Vincent replied, and for the first time in days, his words didn't sound hollow or rehearsed. He truly understood, finally, that actions had consequences that couldn't always be reversed with belated apologies. Beatrice walked to the apartment door, holding it open in an unmistakable gesture. The conversation was over, and prolonging it would only make everything harder for both of them. Vincent walked past her, pausing briefly in the hallway to look back one last time. The apartment behind Beatrice glowed with soft afternoon light, illuminating all those details of a life she had built despite him, not because of him. The photos on the walls, the organized clutter of a person truly living and working, the personal touches that transformed a space into a home. All of this had existed here while he pursued shadows elsewhere. "Goodbye, Vincent," Beatrice said, her voice carrying finality but not cruelty. It was a farewell, not a curse. "Goodbye, Beatrice," he echoed, and then added, because it needed to be said at least once with complete honesty, "I'm sorry for everything, and congratulations. On the award, on the company, on everything you've built. You deserve every recognition." She nodded in acknowledgement, then gently closed the door. Vincent heard the sound of the lock engaging, followed by the heavy silence of a chapter definitively closed. He stood in the hallway for another moment, as if expecting the door to open again, that there would be some last-minute twist, like in movies. But real life rarely offered convenient endings or unearned second chances. The subway ride back to Manhattan was full of families returning from Sunday outings, their lively conversations and laughter creating a soundtrack of normalcy that seemed to exist in a universe parallel to Vincent's. He found a seat in the corner and watched the city pass by the window, the neighborhoods gradually shifting from residential to commercial as they approached the heart of the city. His phone vibrated with a message from Marcus. "Beatrice told me you showed up. I don't know if it was brave or stupid, but at least you faced the music. The papers will be delivered tomorrow at 10 a.m. Sign them quickly and let her move on." Vincent typed a simple reply. "I'll sign them. And Marcus, thank you for looking after her when I failed. Seriously." The reply came several minutes later. "I didn't do it for you, but I recognize you're trying to grow. Good luck with that." It was probably the closest thing to absolution Vincent would receive from the Chen family, and honestly, it was more than he deserved. He put his phone away and closed his eyes, letting the sway of the train and the hum of conversations around him create a kind of involuntary meditation. For the first time in years, Vincent tried to imagine his future without the external markers he had always used to define success. Without the impressive title, without the approval of colleagues whose names he would barely remember in a decade, without the constant validation of being with the right woman at the right events. What remained when you removed all the performance? The answer was frightening in its uncertainty, but also strangely liberating. He could be anyone, rebuild himself from scratch, learn to find value in things that couldn't be photographed or printed on business cards. It would be a long and likely painful process. But for the first time, Vincent felt something that might be the distant beginning of genuine hope. Monday arrived with the kind of clear autumn morning that made New York feel like possibilities instead of problems. Vincent arrived at the office earlier than usual, wanting to deal with the paper delivery before his colleagues started circulating with their disguised questions and morbid curiosity. The messenger arrived exactly at 10, as promised, an older man with kind eyes who asked no questions, just requested a signature confirming delivery. Vincent took the thick envelope to his office and closed the door, his hands surprisingly steady as he broke the seal. The documents were exactly as Beatrice had described, fair to the point of generosity. She asked for nothing but her freedom, not even reimbursement for half the costs of the Brooklyn apartment, which was technically still in both their names. There was a clause about maintaining mutual privacy, not speaking publicly about the marriage or the divorce, which Vincent recognized as protection for both of them, but primarily for her public reputation. Attached to the legal documents was a handwritten note on plain paper, Beatrice's handwriting as familiar as his own. Vincent unfolded it carefully, his heart quickening despite knowing he shouldn't expect words of reconciliation. Vincent, it read, "When we married, I believed love meant total sacrifice, erasing oneself for the other. It took me a long time to understand that true love means seeing and celebrating who the other person truly is, not who you want them to be. We both failed at this. I for allowing myself to disappear and you for encouraging me to do so. But we also learned, however painfully. I hope you carry these lessons forward and find real happiness, the kind that doesn't need to be validated by an audience. Be well, Beatrice." Vincent read the note 3 times, memorizing every word, every curve of her handwriting. It was forgiveness and farewell, an acknowledgement of shared failures without minimizing his own. It was the kind of grace he had never shown her, offered freely now that there was nothing left to gain. He signed the papers with a pen Beatrice had given him years ago for an anniversary he barely remembered celebrating. The irony was not lost on him. When he finished, Vincent scanned the signed documents and sent them to Beatrice's lawyer, then filed the original copies in a folder he simply labeled Closure. His phone rang almost immediately. It was Richard Whitmore, and Vincent briefly considered ignoring the call before deciding that running away wouldn't solve anything. "Vincent." Richard's voice was professional but cold. "Amanda asked me to make it clear that any relationship between you two is definitively over. She also wants you to know that you won't have any problems from her, as long as you maintain discretion." "Understood," Vincent replied, surprised by how little Amanda's rejection actually affected him. "And Mr. Whitmore, regarding the partnership between your hotels and Green Tech, I hope it goes forward. It's a good deal for both sides." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Surprise, probably. "I appreciate the maturity," Richard said finally. "And Vincent, for what it's worth, we all make mistakes in our marriages. The trick is to learn from them before repeating them in the next ones." The call ended, and Vincent stood looking at his phone, considering the accidental wisdom of those words. He had destroyed his marriage with Beatrice. That was undeniable and irreversible. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could use those ashes as fertilizer to grow into something better. Through his office window, Vincent could see Manhattan stretching out in all directions, millions of lives interwoven into a complex tapestry of ambitions and dreams. Somewhere out there, Beatrice was building her empire, surrounded by people who valued her appropriately. And here, in this office that suddenly seemed smaller and less important, Vincent was finally beginning to learn what it truly meant to see someone, even if the lesson had cost him everything.